Hello, everybody, and welcome to an emergency podcast as the Eagles have made another signing. Josh Uche, the former second-round pick edge rusher with some versatility, formerly of the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs, where he was a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl. Bo Wulf joined by Fran Duffy and Berman. Zach, give us the scoop on the Eagles' thinking as they add Josh Uche.
Yeah, a situational pass rusher who comes cheap. Right? We haven't seen the numbers yet. It's a one-year deal. The Eagles obviously need edge rushing depth. They lost Josh Sweat this week. We're expecting Brandon Graham. Well, Brandon Graham could retire this offseason. So you look at the Eagles depth chart. They have obviously Nolan Smith. Okay. They have Jalyx Hunt. They have for now Bryce Huff. And they don't really have anyone thereafter who you're saying is definitely going to be on the team. So this was a spot that they'll continue to address. Josh Uche and you guys will kind of get into the profile, but he's he's someone who has been productive in the past, but obviously the Eagles are buying a prolonged dip here, 2 consecutive seasons without much production, and really only 1 year of like notable production as a sacker in the NFL.
Before we get into Josh Uche, I want to follow up on something there because I thought it was the most interesting part of Adam Schefter's tweet about this was without Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham, as if it was definitive. Is your expectation that is a definitive thing from the Eagles' perspective that Brandon Graham will retire?
That's that's what I've been hearing is the expectation is that he will retire. It's ultimately Brandon Graham's decision. The season went longer this year. He's recovering from an injury now. I saw him at the facility 2 days ago or 3 days ago. Caught up about some other stuff, not about that, but he's recovering from an injury at this point. So he'll make the decision when he's right. But I don't anticipate at this point Brandon Graham being on the roster this season.
Now, in terms of the level of investment, typically when you don't see dollar amounts reported right away, it means it's going to be pretty low. And the story of Josh Uche's young career, he is still just 26 years old, will be 27 in September, is that he had that really peak year in 2022, his third year in the NFL, 11 and a half sacks for the Patriots. And then last year, 3 sacks. And he's a player who we talked about as a potential Eagles free agency signing last year as a chance to buy the dip. And the dip continued in 2024. Midway through the season, traded to the Kansas City Chiefs for just a 2026 sixth-round pick. Did not ingratiate himself there. He's just got 5 total sacks over the past 2 seasons. But in terms of the type of player the Eagles are getting in the ideal version of Josh Uche, he is someone who gives that flexibility on the outside, right, Fran?
Yeah, I mean, this is an undersized edge rusher, 6'1 1/4, 245 pounds when he was coming out of Michigan in the 2020 draft. He was a 1-year starter when he was there, so it was very much a projection for him. Became a second-round pick by New England, like you mentioned. Took a little bit of time, and then he had that huge spike year a couple of seasons ago. But he's got a very specific skill set where you kind of have to scheme around him, right? Just because of the type of rusher he is, it's a lot of pure speed rush. You want to move him around, keep him standing up, and so I'm fascinated to see how the Eagles view him, how Vic Fangio views him, because honestly, it's a similar kind of background and build to Zach Bond. And look, I had it's funny enough, both Uche, Bryce Huff, and Zach Bond all were in that same draft class, and similar kind of archetypes as those undersized rushers. I think when you're looking at Uche, he was much more of the projection, a positionless player because sometimes he was off the ball as a stacks player, sometimes he was down off the edge, and so it was a lot of debate about what he would be in the NFL. And I think that ambiguity has followed him over the course of his career.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I do think that is worth considering here. Zach, you have told us heading into this free agency that you still think the Eagles wanted to fill the type of role that they thought Zach Bond was going to be last offseason, that guy who could do a little bit of edge, a little bit of inside work, and not just become the best football linebacker in football. Do you think there's a chance that that's how they view Josh Uche here?
Well, it's not something that you would rule out just based on the frame and the athletic, like the movement skills. He's a little more established as an edge rusher than Zach Bond was a year ago. But yeah, I mean, if we were talking about like Baron Browning, for instance, it is conceivable that that's something that they look at just because he can move. He is that size, and that was the profile coming out of Michigan, like the versatility that he has, and the fact that he moves differently for that spot. So I as I said leading into free agency, I thought the Eagles would look for that type of role. I know they were excited about that with Bond a year ago before they moved Bond to the inside, to have someone who can help you in different packages. Unlike Baron Browning, who we spoke about, Josh Uche has special teams experience, so he could help there. So when Fran brought that up to me off camera, I said, that's an interesting thought. It's not something I thought about, but that is an interesting thought.
Yes, I think it remains a possibility. Now, first of all, thank you to the super chat for telling us, according to Mike, that it's Uche, not Uche. So that's good to know. Josh Uche. You just look at like how often he has been in coverage. That has been something that he has been asked to do a lot over the course of his time in New England. You do I'm going to True Media and I'm sorting all the edge rushers with at least 600 pass rush snaps over the past 3 years combined. And he's ranking towards the top of those guys, towards the top end-ish of those guys in terms of quarterback hit rate. He's actually right around Montez Sweat, but he also is in coverage a good amount, 16, 17% of the time over the course of that time. That's in like the Matthew Judon, Uchenna Nwosu range. But it is important to keep in mind that even in the best case scenario of Josh Uche, even in that 11.5 sack season, he was still a rotational, like he was still playing like 35-40% of the snaps. He was just making the most of them. This is not a guy who, even in the best version of himself, is going to be more than edge 3 or 4.
No, you're right about that, and that's the role that you're signing him in for. And as you know, as we didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this, but as we were preparing for this, I was going to make this joke about how in NovaCare they probably went on YouTube and watched last year's Quackatology because AJ Dillon and Josh Uche were.
We don't have the cash for this year's Quackatology. Let's go back to last year.
Yeah. So, but as I say that, there is probably something to that, in the sense that you're getting probably players who you had decent evaluations on a year ago at lower prices this year. AJ Dillon, Josh Uche. I mean, I imagine these were guys who they looked at a year ago and like their pro scouting department's like, yeah, this is interesting, but we're spending more on Bryce Huff and Saquon Barkley, or we just don't have the value for them right now. Both of those guys are more depressed assets 1 year later, and that's kind of the water that the Eagles are swimming in. So I bring that up when you talk about the Josh Uche role. Yeah, this is not a guy who's pushing Jalyx Hunt for playing time, who's pushing Nolan Smith for playing time. This is a guy who's your fourth edge rusher, and then as both Bo and Fran said, as someone who maybe they can cross train to play off ball a bit as well.
And I mean, to be realistic, the Chiefs traded for the guy after the Patriots gave up on him. They gave up a pittance. They need edge rushing help, right? And they're letting him go for free. He wasn't even active in the Super Bowl. So right now the Eagles edge rushers 3 and 4 are two guys who were healthy scratches in the Super Bowl with him and Bryce Huff. But you know what? If you're playing at the the dollar store version of free agency in this year's offseason, it's a fine gamble to take, right, Fran?
Yeah, and that's the thing is look, you're taking a stab at a player that could potentially make your roster as a 4th or 5th edge rusher. A guy that you can use in specialty packages and move around. I am fascinated about what that long-term position is, but this is that's the role that you're envisioning, is that he is able to help you from a pressure package standpoint. You mentioned the experience dropping in coverage. I don't think he offers a ton at the point of attack as a run defender, based off what I've watched from him in limited samples, but that's the value that you're hoping to get from Uche, at least, especially on those money downs.
There you go. I feel like, I don't want to go too crazy on Josh Uche. It's fine.
No, it's the same, it's the same thing. We are honest about this. They signed Rashad Penny at one point. He wasn't a contributor. I mean, last year, Matt Hennessy signed. He didn't make the team. And I think Howie would be honest about this if you spoke to him, that you take a certain amount of lottery tickets, right? And if this bet hits or that bet hits, it's good. But I don't think in the building they're kind of putting, well, it's all digital now, but in not the old days, but a few years ago, they would put the card up, or whatever you call it, the placard up with his name on it. I don't think they're doing that and saying like, all right, we're set here, it's done. Like this edge rushing search, in particular edge rushing, that continues.
And honestly, the goal with this stuff, which we talk about, is to draft proof. And you're not going to not draft an edge guy because you have Josh Uche, but it's so that, let's say you're in round 3 and you're looking at your depth chart and you're like, oh man, we really could use an edge rusher, but this guy's like a whole tier below this, defensive tackle that we could take. You don't want to force that pick. Something like this allows you to just stay a little bit patient and let the draft come to you to some standpoint. Super chat from Dave, who says, what, if anything, does this mean for the chances that the Eagles will sign Azeez Ojulari, Zach? Ojulari is like the last top 50 free agent still unsigned.
Yeah, outside of like your
quarterbacks.
You're like, no, like your Von Miller, like your older guys, right? Yeah. But yeah, of the like 24, 25-year-old age profile, absolutely. This has nothing to do, like if they were interested in Azeez Ojulari yesterday, they'll be interested in Azeez Ojulari tomorrow. This would have nothing to do with it. Josh Uche has no guarantee to make the roster, I imagine. I imagine the Ojulari thing is just a matter of price, right? Is that what does he want? What are teams willing to pay for him? But yeah, I don't think one would have anything to do with the other.
And by the way, thank you to TrueMark Financial for sponsoring this emergency episode. Visit TrueMark.com for rates and to learn more. TrueMark Financial, federally insured by the NCUA, equal opportunity lender. Rates are subject to change. Fran, since we have you here and you're not going to be on the show today, tell the people what they can find on allphly.com today. If they are a diehard, it's a big day.
Yeah, the first version of my big board is out. So the top 100 plus prospects, that I've got on my board, at this point in the calendar, are all available. And there's we talked about it on the draft show here earlier in the week. But I think when you're looking at my board, it's going to be a little bit different. It's based solely off my evaluations, my projections. As we've been talking about all of these free agents and players that have changed teams, there are guys that I'm higher on than what the consensus is, guys that I'm lower on than consensus, and it's based solely off of how I project them moving forward. It's not predictive in terms of who's going to be the top 100 guys off the board. That is not how I put that together. That's what the mock draft is for. For me, this is an exercise in terms of how I project these guys making the transition to the NFL. And so, when I'm reading my notes on Josh Uche, it's the same thing. I project he was my 21st ranked edge coming out in 2020, a guy that I thought would be kind of a back end roster type. And that went up against, he went in the second round to the New England Patriots, right? So that's going up against how the projection was from a draft slot. But that's just what the role was for me in my mind was Josh Uche. And so I think when you're looking at that, just keep that in mind.
Nailed it. ZB, we have a super chat from Vince who says he wants to know if there are any new updates on Mekhi Becton. Vince, he's very interested in this. He has a steak dinner on the line.
Well, Vince, thank you very much for your contributions to PHLY. Any new updates on Mekhi Becton? No. And this is probably similar to the Ojulari situation where you're kind of it's a in the prime player who sees the position, who sees the prices for players at that position. I imagine his representation's probably trying to push more closer to like an Aaron Banks type deal, right? And clearly if a team valued him at that, there would be such a signing. I still don't anticipate him coming back to the Eagles. I still anticipate Kenyon Green and Tyler Steen and Trevor Keegan, for that matter, competing, and maybe the Eagles draft a tackle guard swing guy who's in the mix as well. But that is my guess. I don't think it's going to be Becton, but there is no update as far as where Becton will land. And as I say that, maybe Becton signs like 5 minutes after we leave the show. But he is, we always talk about this every year that early in free agency, like the first 2-3 days in free agency, okay, it is it's the seller's market, right? So it's the players. Once you get past that time, it favors the teams. So the longer you linger, the worse it is for Mekhi Becton.
Yeah, it's surprising that he's now Tevin Jenkins is out there as well. So you wonder if there's who will go first, and then there's a cascading effect there between those two guys. but it's a little bit bizarre. I actually think the longer he's out there, the more likely it is that he comes back. But I do still think that is less likely than more likely.
Yeah.
All right.
One quick thing before our show at 2:00 is the Eagles are making over video conference. Thankfully, video conference, so I can be on it. But we will be speaking to Kenyon Green. We will be speaking to Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So just a little, we'll have any pertinent updates on the show at 2:00.
Someone tells me that Tevin Jenkins has signed with the Bengals, but it looks like that is not a done deal yet.
Gotcha.
There's interest from the Bengals. Can I, before Zach, I know you got to go. Can I ask you guys a parenting question while I have you both here?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, so here's the situation. Casey's very into Pokemon, right? He's got his binder of Pokemon cards. He knows them all off the top of his head. He's got all his cards, and every day at aftercare, they're looking at cards with other kids. And there was something that happened a couple of weeks ago where he came home and said that a kid had made a trade with him, and then the week later asked for the card back but didn't give the first one back. And he was not complaining about it. He was just explaining how his day meant. He was he really needed it back, and it was no big deal. So this kid was on my radar. And then 2 days ago, I go to pick him up, and Casey's packing up, and the other kid's looking at his cards, and I see the kid take one of Casey's cards out of his binder and put it into his. I see the thing happen. Casey was not watching; he was getting his backpack, and so I didn't want to make a big deal of it, but I just said is that yours or his? And the kid was like, oh, it's his. I'm sorry. And I didn't want to shame the kid, but then on the way home, I told Casey, I was like, hey, just so you know, no big deal, but I did see him take that card. And, Casey was very much he's like, I'm shocked. And very much he must have thought it was his, he must have just made an honest mistake, really making apologies for the kid. So I don't want to push it too hard, but I also want him to be aware that I don't know, be aware of this kid, but this is his friend. So I don't want to make him not be friends with this kid. But I also want it to be on his radar that this kid's he's trying to steal.
I think you did the right thing. I would have done the same. I borderline almost say that might be a parent-to-parent conversation too. Personally.
Yeah, because honestly, my one real parenting philosophy is don't parent someone else's kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
that's
exactly.
what I feel. Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm just dealing with Casey.
Yeah.
I don't want to have a conversation with the other kid, but I was I don't want to push it too hard.
Yeah.
But I don't want him to get steamrolled.
Yeah, I think you were in the right with how you acted yesterday. I would have done the same thing. I would keep an eye on that one. That to me,
the kids on my radar.
Comments in the chat, I think, are spot on. I agree with them.
I just saw him do it red-handed. What are we doing, dude? That's a quack of all the X. All right, that's all I got. All right, Josh Uche signs with the Eagles. Add some depth to the edge rush group. We will be live at 2:00 to further unpack this and the Pokemon situation for Zach, Fran, and Julia. We thank you for watching and listening. Thanks to TrueMark Financial. Once again, check out the big board on allphly.com. Great time to become a diehard. $36 for the entire year. Jump in now while you still can. For all of us here, we thank you for watching. We'll talk to you later. And as always, we love you.
We all silly like the mayor.